Ladies and gentlemen, I have a small confession to make. That is, I never wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be an archaeologist actually. And right through my school days, I was on that track till I came up to O-levels, and then my father died early, and my mother asked me, what are you going to do? And I said, I want to do archaeology. So she said, I think, son, you should leave the digging in the ground to the undertakers, to Raymond, and do something else. So I then went into architecture. But I think I kept coming back because I am now into conservation, and also I work a lot with the Department of Archaeology and so on. Now, what I'm trying to present to you today is basically something that I've been working on for a very long time and so on. I find that the quality of architecture is governed by traditional intuition and the level of cultural development in a country. It is not only regional, it is country specific as well. Now, the reference to landscape is not to do with plants, but the whole. It encompasses and is to do with urban geography, buildings, the spaces in between, and the community. So it's not, when I talk of landscape, I'm not talking about it in the very narrow sense of planting trees or planting bushes or whatever it is, but the urban landscape, which is a much bigger concept, is to do with geography of the whole area. And basically architecture is a process of building well. There's nothing about gimmicks and so on. And take into account culture, place, location, orientation, human needs and use, building layout, solid and void, shading, thermal mass and comfort, ventilation, etc. Good building is not dictated by style or fashion. It has a timeless quality, devoid of gimmicks, and that is then usually defined as architecture. Countries with strong and deep cultural roots, including traditional societies, understood and used the process of ecological design in a holistic manner. A greater understanding of the traditional mind would facilitate a methodology to guide the contemporary builder and his buildings. A need to copy what others do abroad is not a solution nor an end, but a beginning to destruction. Copycat urban developments and office parks end up as ghettos, devoid of life after working hours and at weekends. St. Jacobs, in a famous book, Dark Ages Ahead, talks about the end of culture, especially the way we live today. Picture books cannot and do not protect the loss of a culture. The printed media is incapable of passing down a culture. It has to be experienced, it has to be lived, hence the importance and a need for a vibrant community to carry a culture forward. Now, erasing that community means that's the end of that culture. Many of us have already forgotten that cities were created for people and not people for the cities. We are now changing our cities to fit the vehicle. This metal monster was never scaled to the requirement of a city. If they were, they would have been very small and highly efficient. Public transport and not cars, is the future. For the efficient movement of people, the tram, the bus, now rapid transport systems are rising to the real needs of the city. Footwalks should be always people-friendly and especially in the tropics well shaded. The gentrification of our cities, which is happening extensively, is a sure indication that society is on the decline. It leaves many people, especially the communities, the preservers and the repositories of the cultural matrix, disorientated and totally helpless. Jeff Rubin, in The End of Growth, argues that the present concept of world growth is dictated by the price of oil, and with the increased cost of exploration and inherent increases in cost, development as we know it would grind to a halt. The growth cycle is receding and the world is in recession. This will affect everything we do, of course, unless we continue to wage wars, killing thousands of innocents to get our hands on cheap sources of oil. Population growth is a result of the economic expansion in the past decades, and only sustainable solution today is the lowering of this demand for energy. In Everything Under the Sun, David Suzuki refers to the geoengineering as the height of our arrogance. They are using hydrocarbons to produce carbohydrates. Is the human species well on its way to extinction? At this rate, I would say yes. The high-rise building is an expression conceived during an era of cheap oil and is still seen by some as a solution to all our ills. In some countries, they are demolishing the tall buildings of the 1960s as they are now designated as sick buildings, as failures, while in others the herd instinct prevails. Is this new expressive, gimmick-driven trend evidence of an end of culture or a revelation that no culture ever existed? I would like to show you some examples of countries where I think there is some positiveness. Italy, for example. Take Rome, though built over many centuries, its designers respected the scale of the city of Rome. Newer buildings were constantly added along the streets, but all respected the human scale of Rome. The vehicle is seen only as a mode of transport, not really as a part of the city. Roads have not been widened, they are still with the community of Rome. It's preserved for the community of Rome. That's a Novona. When I was studying in Rome, I spent a lot of time here. It's a fantastic place. It's a 6 square in Rome, built on the site of the stadium in the 1st century AD. This follows the form, the city that's been developed now follows the form of the open space of the stadium. The building round the squares were built over many centuries at totally different times. They're all very different, but they all respect the scale of the piazza and the city as a whole. Rome's architecture over the centuries have developed from classical and imperial Roman styles to modern fascist architecture. And you find that there are examples of all the styles that Europe went through in Rome. Eur, the residential and business district in Rome, is located along the south of the city center. The area was originally chosen in the 1930s as a site for the 1942 World Fair, which Benito Mussolini planned to celebrate 20 years of fascism. The project was originally called EU 42, after the year in which the exhibition was planned to be held. EU was also designed to direct the expansion of the city towards the southwest and the sea, and to be a new city center for Rome. The planned exhibition never took place due to World War II, but the vision of EU, in a way, saved classical Rome for its people and for its many visitors. These are some of the buildings in EU, in Mussolini's new city. There is a lot of talk about conservation. Conservation should be sympathetic and respect the periods. I'm not going to talk of examples, but you will guess when I'm talking. Moldings were different from period to period. If we copy moldings on the basis that one looks better than the other, we are falsifying the historicity of the building, in fact destroying the city, instead of preserving it. ICOMOS International has clearly stated that retaining the facade only, demolishing the inside and in its place constructing a new storied building has nothing to do with conservation. It is designated as a destruction of patrimony. I'll give you a few examples of buildings that were done in Rome. This is Paolo Portuguesi's mosque, which he built in the 1970s. But you see that he was very, very careful where he sited the minarets, where he had this, so that it would not upset the city of Rome. The historical panorama of Rome was not destroyed by what he did. This is a building by Zaha Hadid, which anybody knowing Zaha Hadid's work today will never imagine. In 1998, the Italian government decided to provide Rome with a proper center for contemporary arts, with the ample space required by some installations designed for today's artists. And this is in an old barracks area with a very large courtyard surrounded by a low early 20th century building. The project, developed by a British architect, Zaha Hadid, won an international contest. One of the strong points of the project was that it took into account the urban layout of the neighborhood and the general landscape of Rome by avoiding the construction of a tall building, which would have modified the historical view of Rome from the Janicium. In 2010, Zaha Hadid was awarded the Royal Institute of British Architects Sterling Prize for this project. This is a church by Richard Meyer, conceived as a new center for somewhat isolated housing quarters located outside central Rome. The church was built for the Jubilee year 2000. Although it was not completed until 2003, three large shells constitute the most impressive feature of the building. They represent sails, a reminder of the tradition, iconography of the church as a boat. The 5 bells have a meaning too. They represent the 5 continents, a topic already existing in many Roman monuments. Curved sails offer many interesting views. The lateral view perpendicular to the axis of the church is less satisfying because the sails seem to merge in just one shape. But it's very interesting because you will find that it's something that even the early Italian architects were trying to do, relate the building to the sky and the sun and so on. So this is why if you look at some of the early buildings, they worked on trying to paint they try to paint the sky and show stars and so on. This is what is supposed to be. This is an auditorium by Renzo Piano. Renzo Piano is most likely the best known living Italian architect. In 1994, he won a competition for providing Rome with a multifunctional complex dedicated to music. His winning project is characterized by 3 music boxes, 3 halls with different capacities, as well as an open-air theatre for 3,000 people. They're very simple buildings, but they really work. The domes of Rome, including St. Peter's Dome, are covered with lead. As this metal protects the structures below from the impact of excessive variations of the outside temperature. The way Renzo Piano has designed and assembled the lead panels covering the 3 halls is no doubt the most impressive feature of the auditorium. I'll take you closer to us, to Yemen. Traditional architecture of Yemen. Yemeni people have inherited building skills since ancient times, and construction seems to be in their lifeblood. The country's architectural history is strongly tied both to its traditions and locally available construction materials. It is known that the Yemeni people who created such a fantastic architecture are proud of it, and they continue to build in traditional ways. In contrast to many developing countries, the Yemen does not seem to suffer from an acute housing problem. Shibam, the Manhattan of the desert, has been declared a World Heritage Site. In fact, I did some work. I restored an old mosque in Taiz, in Yemen, and I had the privilege of going to Shibam. It's an incredible city. Buildings are like 18, 20 stories high. This was before Manhattan ever thought of doing what they were doing. And it's all made of mud. Right? Mud and timber. Incredible. Derek Matthews comments, new construction still follows the old traditions, creating a holistic entity. The result is an achievement of a function and harmonious architecture suited to the life of the Yemeni people. However, when alien techniques and materials are introduced, there are several ill effects. With imported materials, a large proportion of the cost goes to the pockets of a few contractors, with only 25% remaining in the district. If local communities are to participate in self-help construction, money must be spent locally, on local materials and labor. In addition, imported building methods usually prove to be unsuited to the climate because the walls and the roofs are not heavy enough. I'll give you one interesting example where I was at a conference in Mali, and there was this French consultant who was sent by UNESCO to introduce a method into the mud. I don't know if you know about the mud structure in Mali. There's some beautiful mosques and so on, very tall, say 60, 70 feet tall, but all mud and sort of timber. This expert was sent to show them how to build to get over the earthquakes and so on. Now, the Malians had a very simple method. They had timber that went across to the corners and tied together. So when there was an earthquake, it just moved a little bit and settled perfectly. But what did this so-called expert do? He cut the mosque into sections and put concrete columns and beams and so on, and then plastered the whole thing, anchored there. 1 year later there was an earthquake and the buildings shook, and the only thing that was left was the concrete columns and the beams. So, that's something that the experts do. Look at Japan, for example. The traditional buildings respected the people, the climate, and the materials used. When you look at their modern buildings, Kenzo Tange's Olympic building displays an evolution from a strong traditional root. Even their contemporary architecture has achieved a strong discipline and order that the Japanese are very famous for. For example, there's a little debate going on now in Tokyo about this building. Maki has rallied together a number of Japanese architects, including Fujimoto, Ito, and Kuma, to oppose the massive scale of Zaha Hadid's competition-winning national stadium. Planned to be Tokyo's main venue for the 2020 Olympic and the Paralympic Games, Hadid's 290,000 square meter stadium is accused of being too big and too artificial for the surrounding context. Again, you can see it yourself, because if you see, it's set into Tokyo, completely out of scale for Tokyo itself. China. Traditional China built for the climate, respected its people's requirements. There are lots more examples, I'm just showing only a few. The religious buildings like the pagodas or the vertical stupas were expressions that respected tradition, they grew out of the land. Of course, then you have the Cultural Revolution and so on, which changed a lot of what was happening in China. Everything that was suspected of being feudal or bourgeois was to be destroyed. There was a move away from the past. Today the value of many elements from the past that survive is much valued. They are being carefully and painstakingly restored and preserved. But this is too late for culture. Did it change too much? This is some of the early buildings that came up in China. China is in the middle of a mass migration of residents from rural areas to urban centers, and a building boom where development plans often happen so fast that considerations for design, technology, and quality are sacrificed for low production costs and speed. At the same time, Chinese governments are commissioning projects they believe will bring renown to major cities like Shanghai, Beijing, as well as second and third tier cities. The result, according to critics, is that China is flooded with projects focused on flashiness and large scale. Another factor is that China's modern architectural sensibility in some way is still in its infancy. The industry has only begun emerging over the past 30 years during the country's economic reform and opening up. After decades of following Soviet-style city design, today the numerous of all, according to Professor Wu, a member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Chinese Academy of Engineering, said, means the People's Republic is now seeing a surge of demand for the avant-garde and novel, no matter how tacky it is. But, of course, it's not without hope. Dubai, your favorite city. At top is an aerial view of Dubai in 1991, and the bottom is Dubai in 2013. Of course, Dubai has no cheap oil, so it's selling off a lot of its buildings to the state of Qatar. Dubai, for example, is a country lacking in cultural depth. In fact, it has no cultural depth at all. So they can do anything. The palms, suburbia in the sea. I don't know if you want to pay $10 million and live next to somebody else. And a new city every day. Steve Rose of The Guardian recorded the process in this fashion. Foreign architects have had a ball in Dubai, at least until recently. It's been the place where you can get away with anything, no matter how outlandish or oversized the idea. No one seemed to be saying no, and somebody else was always paying. As a result, the Emirate has been waging some sort of architectural arms race with itself, each new development trying to outdo the last, while the rest of the world looked on with a mixture of disdain and possibly envy. So here are some of the craziest highlights from a future that will probably never arrive, but you never know, it still might. Here are some of the projects being suggested that to be built in Dubai. I'll just take you through a flashing of some of them. Modern Dubai, is this architecture or unsustainable, iconic exhibition pavilion? That's choice. According to Maggie and Kate, author of The Heights and Anatomy of a Skyscraper, she explains what happens to sewage from the birds and Dubai's other tall buildings. 1,700 kilometers of piping has been laid. However, during Dubai's economic boom in 2009, the city's rapid growth meant that it was stretching its existing sewerage treatment infrastructure to its limits. Sewerage from areas of Dubai not connected to the municipal pipe network at the time was collected daily from thousands of septic tanks across the city and driven by tankers to the city's only sewerage treatment plant. Because of long queues and delays, some tanker drivers resorted to illegally dumping the effluent into storm drains or behind dunes in the desert, resulting in much controversy. The result of sewage dumped into the storm drains was that it flowed directly into the Persian Gulf, near to the city's prime swimming beaches. Doctors warned that tourists using the beaches ran the risk of contracting serious illnesses like typhoid and hepatitis. So in other words, I have seen queues of 200, 300 tankers queuing up to go and collect what from the septic tank, and it happens daily. Singapore again has a very shallow historical past and an exhibition pavilion future. There are some very good examples and also some very strange ones. The architecture of Singapore displays a range of influences and styles from different places and periods. These range from eclectic styles and hybrid forms of the colonial period to the tendency of more contemporary architecture to incorporate trends from around the world, in both aesthetic and technological terms, from the late 1990s. Like many other global cities and aspiring global cities, Singapore government consciously launched a drive to develop iconic landmarks in the city as a means to strengthening the Singapore brand identity as well as to attract tourists. So in other words, you need exhibition buildings to call tourists to come. Some other examples. Future of Singapore. This building is coming up in Colombo now. That part of the building. So we're also going to have something there. Now if you look at Sri Lanka and the urban environment, starting from the Arsa Sastra, the Silpa Sastra, the Maya Mata, Manasara, and so on and so forth, you find that there was certain ethos which was developing. The first recorded city, the sacred city of Anuradhapura, and the irrigation wells, storage tanks that were developing around it, you find that was the city, and then you have these tanks going around it. If you look from this sketch, for example, that's the citadel, the monasteries, the rivers, monasteries, and the villages with rivers again. So the temperature was completely controlled because of the winds blowing over the rivers brought in the cool breezes into the city. So there was a certain theory in the madness. This is a sacred city, Anuradhapura, Ruwanvelisaya, and so on the right. Monasteries. Something that I discussed in 1982, I said the architecture of Sri Lanka is not an architecture of buildings, but an architecture of levels, terraces, and canopies. And at times, even trees form in the canopy. Jetavana Stupa, for example, built in the 3rd century AD, alleged to be 400 feet to the top. That is the height of 40-story building. We don't have 40-story buildings in Sri Lanka yet. The technical skills for construction, for manufacturing, the required materials, and the management of labor were available. It still is available. And some of the studies I worked on some time ago, the Purana Gamas, because when I came back I found that there was a huge lacuna in my learning process. So I went and spent 6 years in these old villages, sleeping on the pillars and so on, because I thought there was something more that I had to learn, and so on. The rain-fed valley villages with the paddy fields in the valley, the Devalagam and temple villages, with the entrances and so on. I think you are very familiar to this. This is actually a 1902 photograph of Ambekka Devale. That's the entrance to the Devale, and these are the houses of the people who worked in the Devale. And then the only urban examples that we have today are actually from the colonial period. And you can see the beginnings of urban form as recorded in Gaul, for example. This is the Portuguese map of Gaul with only the ramparts on that point, and that's the bay. And then as it developed under the Dutch and so on into more formal layouts and things like that. And that's what you have today as the Gaul fort. Some of the studies that we did in trying to understand the typology of the buildings within the fort and so on. When you come to Colombo, and this is a map of the Portuguese fort in Colombo, and that's the bay and so on. So, the beginnings of urban form. Then the Portuguese-Dutch map of Colombo, where the Peta and the fort was one, and so on. The Dutch then later separated the fort and the Peta, so it was totally different. And the fort was fortified separately and isolated from the Peta, which was a Portuguese creation. And this is the British period map of today, of Colombo, indicating the extensive filling that has taken place. The fort has been demolished, breakwater has been constructed, Chalmers Granary, the railway and so on. And it shows that the bay, which was about 100 times larger earlier, has been reduced to almost a cesspit, which is that much. The early Dutch map of Kandy, the river is shown on the wrong side. In fact, the river should be up there and not here. This is something that Denis Fernando put together some time ago, which is very interesting. And we were looking at how the map could be fitted into present Kandy. And again, this is the section that you saw in the earlier one. That is, this section here enlarged is actually this. It shows that the Dalda Maligawa originally was where the Kataragama Devale is now. And those are the castles along the edge, which gave rise to the castle street and so on. When I stretched that Dutch map to see how I could fit in, that's the Kataragama Devale, and that's the Natha Devale and Vishnu Devale. So in fact, the map is fairly accurate. And then the new Devale is out here. So the whole geography of Kandy has to be looked at very differently. The question that may be asked is, should we totally abrogate our traditions and cultural roots in an attempt to ape the West and make that also our pay? Or should we be bold enough to stand up and say no and have the strength of conviction to evolve our own? The obvious conclusion is yes, we should evolve our own, but to achieve that end, there has to be a strong understanding of tradition and culture and the cooperation from the different ministries and other agencies concerned. They all should be on the same wavelength, a difficult proposition in Sri Lanka because everyone is surrounded by so many experts. I try to list out what I think should be done. Basically, cities were built for people, not people for the cities. This important fact is often forgotten. They are meant to be pedestrian cities with green areas, seating places, with safe and efficient public transport system. Our cities should not become playgrounds only for the rich. Cities should respect and be dedicated to all communities living in it, retain its fullness of life and be people friendly. We should remake our streets, examine them differently, go out of the box. The solution should be simple and less expensive. The role of the vehicle as only a transport device should be understood. At present, all our investments, money, space, and even the environment is invested in cars and car owners. The road widening schemes are destroying the character and the vibrant face of our cities. It's creating a cheap oneness that will age fast, and most are unrecognizable today. There was a time when you even traveled at night and you went through a town, you could recognize what the town was. Today, you don't know where you are, everything looks the same. Every town is exactly the same. At no stage should the vehicle dictate the design of our cities. The vehicle should always be subservient to the needs of the city. The vehicle should neither be seen nor heard. There is a need to preserve the historical and important parts of the city. The conserved building should project the evolution of the city and its historicity. Like a beautiful grandmother, the wrinkles on her face is an integral part of her personality. It gives her character and a due place and stature in society. She is not for sale. Gentrification is not the answer to the sustainable development of the city. Retaining of a facade of a protected building facing the road, demolishing the inside and building a storied building within, according to the Charter of ICOMOS International, has nothing to do with conservation. It's rather destruction of patrimony, and if you go around, you find quite a number of buildings like that. Many of the flashy examples being touted around in Colombo are bad and unsustainable examples introduced by Indian developers who are invading the city. Even if others make suggestions for change, should we not dictate how we as a people want it done? Colombo should remain a medium-sized city, a tropical, people-friendly city. I don't know whether you are aware, but the fire engines can go only up 10 stories. What happens to those above that? I don't know. Sri Lanka projects an impression that she should also join the bandwagon of developing high-rise buildings in the city. The concept of high-rise development developed out of an era of cheap fuel. Many countries that rushed in are now demolishing the buildings of the 1960s. You go to Liverpool and so on, a lot of those apartments that they built are being demolished. Many have now become sick buildings, a drain on the infrastructure resources of the city. The very high cost of maintenance, usually unconsidered, makes the very concept prohibitive. Even if politics dictates the need for such a structure, do we need to copy what is being done elsewhere? Are we incapable of independent thought? What happened to the great builders that conceived the ancient cities? We should be proud of our past and stop taking anything and everything that is being offered. Even a headache, it's free. Where should the high-rise buildings be placed? Not arbitrarily where there is space, but only in specially selected areas where they do not block the natural wind currents and air movements that flow across the city. Certainly not along the coast, as the natural wind currents would be blocked and the corrosive sea breezes will soon render any electronic equipment unusable. Each tall building should be tested in a wind tunnel to understand the effects of one building on the other and the rest of the buildings in the environment. This testing should be included as an essential part of the development cost. We should understand the infrastructure requirements, drainage, sewer systems, water, power, demand, and if necessary, provide what is required. 30 years ago, we were told that the sewers were full. Since then, we have trebled the material input into the sewers. The sewers of Colombo are at bursting point. As we live in the tropics and under the heat of the sun, all paved areas should be well shaded. Our roads, paved areas, and pavements should not end up as heat soaks. I don't know if you all have been to Dubai recently, even at 12 o'clock in the night. It's hot on the road. I mean, you can't walk on the streets. It's so hot, you know. That is, the streets, the roads are heat soaked. It absorbs heat during the day and then gives it out in the night. So, do we need to create that here? As we live in the tropics and under the heat of the sun, all paved areas should be shaded. There is also need for the creation of numerous interconnected urban forests across the city to permit the biodiversity to travel across and interconnect. They should not be isolated pockets of forest. They should be all interconnected that runs through as a ribbon through the city. The city landscaping should give form and depth to the open spaces. They should be simple and free of maintenance. Deep-rooted trees that grow tall and spread out as canopies. Narrower roads and wider pavements and the planting of trees gives the greatest and quickest visual impact to a city. Trees are planted to create volumes, shapes. Planted areas should not be isolated entities, but instead interconnected to form a holistic entity. This is preferable to flower beds that need regular and heavy maintenance. Flower beds are planted at springtime in the west, in the hope that the colors will help to erase the depression of the winters. Flowering plants and creepers with permanent floral displays would help the bees. But then I noticed that all the flowering shrubs that they are planting are being sprayed with chemicals and insecticides and so on. So we are saying, bees, don't come. What is wrong with us Sri Lankans? This is a tropical country and we live in it. We should plant large tropical trees, not ecological trees. I made a suggestion some time ago. In the event Sri Lanka needs a political statement that she has come of age and has joined the modern world, the statement should be positive. When the investor dictates what we should do, it overrides all good sense, treating us like beggars without a choice. Unfortunately, the decision has nothing to do with good planning. They are usually made by a minister in charge of something else. Instead of a scatter of buildings, we should have a single dedicated bank of high-rise development, away from the sea, where all the necessary services can be provided new, and the rest of the city is allowed to develop in a green, human-friendly manner. This proposal was made in the 1990s. The baseline road stretch is ideally located for such a development. Because actually, if you look at it, that's the bridge. And from the bridge right up to Narampita, it's all government buildings. And what we are suggesting is the possibility of creating that as the high-rise spine. It has the largest concentration of government land, has no extensive services infrastructure. All the services required could be newly provided. A rapid transport system could be easily developed to pass through it. The base platform of the spine could be located, say, 10 meters above the ground. It will allow all activity and the existing road networks at ground level to continue undisturbed. On completion, the fickle visitor approaching the city via the airport express highway will encounter the high-rise spine head-on and be bewildered, while the more discerning visitor will be impressed to think Sri Lanka has a mind of her own and has not joined the herd. Investors should be told that is where they should build and nowhere else. If you look at what is happening now in Colombo, they are building high-rise buildings all over the city. It has no meaning, right? Nobody has tested them in a wind tunnel, so you have suctions being created on one side when the wind hits it and so on. It happened to IMP and so on, where windows, doors all got pulled out, and things like that. So these are issues that are not even considered. Sri Lanka has a great building and landscape tradition, an expression that has been handed down for over 2,000 years. It is imperative that all public buildings, especially those constructed using people's money, should reflect a strong cultural context, a sense of place. They should grow out of and belong to Sri Lanka and not be clones of bad buildings constructed elsewhere in the world. There is no need for fairground pavilions that belongs to countries devoid of a cultural background. There is a need to focus on more coordinated and consistent approach to design with a stronger leadership from decision makers. Unfortunately, the carnivores always win. The carnivores are the developers who have the money and now the land. Even if the land is UDA or local authority owned, and even if the local authorities manage to extract the pound of flesh in the form of a social or affordable housing, the money men still call the shots because they have the ultimate sanction they can walk away with. The concept of a need for a cultural context should be entrenched in the bylaws and UDA regulations. What is needed is better planning and a tougher system with more muscle if required. Presently, the planning system governed by unrelated building and environmental principles, often gleaned from foreign bylaws, fails to provide the vision required to set up a clear plan for the future of this special and important Sri Lankan spatial landscape. The focus on place is all important. The creation of a sense of place is fundamental to good architecture. Unfortunately, many have caved into the nation's love affair with the vehicle. Certainly, it could get worse. The love affair extends to unsold vehicles and cars outside a factory in Houston, USA. Millions of brand new unsold cars are just sitting redundant on runways and car parks around the world for years. There they stay slowly deteriorating without being maintained. All around the world there are huge stocks of piles of unsold cars they are being added to every day, waiting to be shipped out to the gullible. Cars parked awaiting sale in Spain, where the cars sunbathe for years, not only tourists, even the cars sunbathe. The car industry cannot stop making new cars because they would have to close their factories and lay off thousands of employees, all forming and contributing to examples of surreal urban art of the techno-production age. In the 1960s to the 90s, our hotels respected the environment. Hotels along the coast respected the height of a coconut tree. They used local materials. The hotels were eco-friendly. They were Sri Lankan hotels. They were not clones of what was being done in Bali or any other country. In the past, those countries copied what was being done in Sri Lanka. Architects came in delegation to see. All hotels are set in tropical gardens. They set the tone in Asia for the relationship between inside and out. Understanding site carrying capacity, landscaping, and respect for vistas was important. And the staff smiled. We then became greed-driven. Nobody cared anymore, and Sri Lanka tourism lost out. Instead of protecting and preserving the most sensitive sites for future generations to enjoy, they are prostituted to this most fickle industry called tourism. Today, LEED certification sells their acquired knowledge to clueless, arrogant entrepreneurs and charge to help us to create eco-friendly buildings. They are teaching us what to do when we had our own and we knew it all along. While the Maldivians, Indonesians, Bali, Malaysia, Singapore and the different cultural regions in India concentrated on branding themselves, Sri Lanka refrained from branding a special Sri Lankan product. Instead, individual companies started to brand themselves. They were more interested in selling themselves, the properties in the Maldives and in other house destinations. Similarly, even though Sri Lanka is alleged to produce the best tea in the world, no hotel serves a good cup of tea. A tea bag and a cup of hot water seems to be the order of the day. We had a great education system and a health service that encompassed the whole island. There was no need to commute. Our production centers were located away from the urban centers. This stemmed the migration to the city, a phenomenon rampant in other cities around the world. Unfortunately, this is being eroded. The World Bank and other international agencies have been selling the idea of megacities for a couple of decades. They have managed to hold it back. The concept of a megacity is based on increased urbanization with enhanced facilities that would act as a draw, creating a heavy increase in rural-urban migration. This would drastically reduce the population in the villages, leaving the natural resources open for easy exploitation. Urbanization can survive only on developing an industrialized social order. Industrialization means producing goods and having secured markets. If Sri Lanka will find it impossible to compete with India and China. If you can't sell what you produce and you cannot eat it either, should we urbanize? The main reason behind the megacity concept is to create sweatshop production centers run by locals that would produce goods cheaply to enable the affluent West to live comfortably, cheaply and continue to accumulate wealth. A study done in the Netherlands about 30 years ago concluded that a minimum 80% drop in the Dutch standard of living was required to bring it in line with the best in the developed world. In other words, we are subsidizing life in the West. Most of the valuable land in the city is being sold for the development of tourism-oriented projects, resulting in rehousing of the poor sections of our society in high-rise apartments, usually placed in close proximity to each other, with their essential human community relationships destroyed. Their inability to put their feet on the earth to feel and experience the warmth of the soil will eventually convert these structures into vertical slums. Because of pseudo-happiness, they are unable to maintain them. This is not the solution. There are many, many examples of failure in other parts of the world, like this example from Hong Kong. The fundamental question that we raised is, do we really need high-rise buildings? Not being anti-tower, but requesting for better towers in the right places with rules and regulations in place to govern their scale and appearance, placing all on a level playing field. Do we really need high-rise buildings and their related infrastructure problems when medium-rise structures occupying the same area could accommodate the same numbers of people in a more human and friendly configuration? A recent conference declared that the whole of Melbourne could be accommodated in a 4-story development. This certainly is worthy of serious thought. Or, at this rate, the city of the future, say like 2050, as shown in this example, will require new urban planning principles as well as special human forms, cloned to create new soulless machines, devoid of all human feelings to inhabit them. Would man, as we know it, evolve to be just static lumps of matter? The increase in the price of oil may save us from that, of course, unless we continue to invade oil-rich countries at the most flimsy excuses in our greed to maintain the price of oil at its cheapest, to enable us to exploit the resources of the rest of the planet in our most unsustainable journey through time. Yes, a city of nearly 50,000 was totally abandoned after the nearby Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1980. Radiation, it was left untouched ever since the incident and will be for many thousands of years into the future. Nature now rules the city in what resembles an apocalyptic movie. In a forested urban landscape, many cities will be proud of. Do we need a nuclear disaster to design our cities like this? All our cities should be turned into oases of calm and tranquility to function as batteries to recharge the soul. Thank you. I have another about 5 slides, if I may. Everybody talks about sustainable development, and we have all the experts coming to tell us how to do sustainable development. That's the guy walking through the forest looking for a village. Our original aim was the same as usual, they say, to bring sustainable development to the village. However, in this specific case, we encountered an unexpected challenge. It turns out that these people, in their own strange kind of way, were already sustainable. So all we could bring them was development. We started with participatory community development, but they did not fully participate. We tried income generating activities, but some people seemed satisfied with less than $1 a day. We even attempted to empower them, but their reaction was more powerful than expected. So we opted for a multi-stakeholder, cross-disciplinary integrated approach. We developed innovative private sector partnerships. We developed vocational skills adapted to shifting economies. We developed tough conservation measures to protect the environment from further harm, and developed ambitious social safety nets for those unable to take care of themselves. It has been a challenging process with many lessons learned. We certainly look forward to applying them elsewhere in the very near future. But for now, let us just say, welcome to the global village. I think we are all heading that way.